right, so let's talk about self-support fatigue, and if that might be something that you're actually struggling with and not realizing it in your personal growth or your healing journey, whether it's alternative or with a traditional practitioner like a psychotherapist or something like that. So, self-support fatigue is something that I noticed in my clients a couple of decades ago, where people would be non-compliant with the things that we agreed that they were going to do, behavioral changes, or maybe medications they were going to take, or changes in their routine in order to heal and get better. And we would go round and round and round, and they just wouldn't do it, even though they cognitively understood how important it was. So, self support fatigue is something that can happen in those of us that grew up in environments where we either had to be hyper independent too early, we took on or were expected to take on too much responsibility, and or we never got the mirroring and the help and support that we needed to help us navigate and figure out the world. It can also happen with children who are hyper responsible for their parents' emotions, meaning they walk on eggshells, or they're really conscious to not stress their parent out, or maybe a parent is ill, so they're having to caretake the parent. There are a lot of different scenarios where self-support fatigue can happen. And essentially what it means is, if you think of this as your capacity for self-care, when you are overly responsible as a child, or overly left to figuring things out on your own as a child in whatever way, this starts to get filled up. Like, your ability to care for yourself starts to get really filled up. And what happens often as adults is, by the time we get into therapy or some other form of healing work, even if it's just our own journey, we're reading books and we're trying to figure ourselves out. Oftentimes what happens is we see what it is we need to do, and we just don't do it. And in our heads, it's like we battle ourselves, like, I know I need to do this. And it can be anything from taking medication regularly, to dietary changes, to behavioral practices that would really help us. It can be things like not taking the supplements that your doctor gave you, not taking the medications, not brushing your teeth, ignoring things that have to do with self-care that in your head you know you need to do. That's oftentimes self-support fatigue. I want to talk with you about what you can do about it and how to address it if this is something that's going on with you. And I'm just going to be sharing my perspective from working with my clients over the years. This is just one of my ways of navigating it. I'm sure there are a lot of other ways out there, but we're just going to put the gist of it on your radar. So, depending on how severe your self-support fatigue is, that's the first thing you want to get a sense of is, like, if this is it, how maxed out am I, and how much room do I have to do more self-care? Am I too full? Am I this full? Am I this full? Am I this? How much room do I have for self-care? The less room you have, the more important it is to adjust the dials of your expectations in your brain and start to look for things that do it for you. Things that do it for you. So it could be going and getting a massage. It could be hiring somebody to make meals for you and deliver those meals. It could be taking a medication like an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety until your brain chemistry balances out and you don't feel so burdened by whatever's going on in your life. It could be something as simple as laying on a Shakti mat, which is like an acupressure mat to relax your sympathetic nervous system and get yourself out of fight or flight and ease your stress. There are a lot of things that you can do that don't have anything to do with you making a ton of effort. So if your self-care fatigue is really extreme, where you're just not able to do what you know you need to do for yourself, you really want to look into and challenge your support people with things that do it for you. For a lot of people, that can be medication. For a lot of people, it can be like I said, the Shakti mat. It can be a biofeedback program at home. It can be listening to music or guided meditations that take you on journeys to relax you, where some external source is providing the thing that you need. And then once you assess how much self-support fatigue you actually have, what you want to do is begin to address the underlying contributors to the self-support fatigue. And this can be tricky because usually what it means is that there are missing tools, meaning there's a situation you were in as a kid and nobody gave you a really effective tool for how to manage that situation. So you had to come up with something on your own. Maybe you relied on withdrawal. Maybe you relied on overwork. Maybe you relied on being super well behaved. Maybe you relied on junk food or escaping through television or things like that. A lot of us as adults assume that we have the tools instead of examining whether or not we have the tools. So it's really exploring, did I ever get a tool for these situations that I'm confronting as an adult? And if so, what were the tools? Don't just assume that you have them. So kind of take a tool inventory and then ask yourself, where would I have gotten these tools? Who would have taught me? What kind of teachers would they have been? Would they have been anxious teachers, angry teachers, addicted teachers, codependent teachers, healthy teachers? And teachers can be parents, they can be teachers at school, they can be relatives, they can be other children. So where did you learn the tools? Don't just assume that you have them. So that's the first thing, is where did you learn the tools and what tools do you have? Another thing that can happen is with self-support fatigue is that you didn't get good mirroring where someone, like an adult typically, is paying attention to you and noticing the different experiential states that you're in. So maybe you're frustrated, or maybe you feel really excited, or maybe you feel a little scared, or maybe you're lacking confidence, or maybe you are in a state of immense joy. And that person pays attention to you and meets you in that space and gives you language. Oh, you seem really frustrated, or oh, look at the joy in your body. Isn't it wonderful? Or whatever. And helping you direct that energy. So even joy, when some of us as children, when we have a lot of joy in our bodies, it kind of blows our circuits out, and we need help moving our energy so we don't get really spastic or burn ourselves out or make poor impulsive choices. So no matter what state you're in, having an adult present who's witnessing, so first of all, they're paying attention to you. And then second of all, they're accurately naming the experience you're having, and then they're giving you good support, guidance, and tools for the experience that you're having. That's what I mean. If you did not get that, then you may not even have language for what you're feeling. You may not have really basic tools. You may not know how to manage your energy as it goes through its natural arc. Some people call that self-regulation. Those things may be missing for you, so don't just assume that you have them. A result of this process, if you're not getting really good mirroring, is that you don't actually learn what your needs are. You don't learn that it's even okay to have needs. So the whole language and recognition and understanding and skillfulness with the needs that we have can largely be absent. We can spend an entire lifetime of not asking for our needs to be met, not knowing how to delegate, not knowing how to make requests, not knowing how to set boundaries, all the things that go with knowing what your needs are, experiencing your needs as valid, and being skillful with them. So we can get into dysfunctional relationships. We can withhold, we can withdraw, we can get very angry at people when they don't psychically guess what our needs are because we're craving mirroring and don't realize we're expecting other people to mirror us when that's not their job. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes along with this, right? So if you do have self-support fatigue, it's really important that we focus on addressing our hyperindependence or addressing our excessive need of others, right? So it's usually one of those two extremes. We're either excessively hyper independent or we're excessively needy and shirking of responsibilities and wanting other people to do it for us as like, if you loved me, you would kind of thing. And we really need to focus on maturing ourselves, growing our maturity. And here's what I mean by that. Our systems, when we are young, we do not have the physiological capacity for a lot of what we experience in life. So if you were under a lot of stress as a kid, you don't actually have a nervous system and a physiology that can support stress beyond a certain point. And what can happen is that we hold on to this belief that our system is limited to what it was when we were 5 or 8 or 14 or even 20 years old. And we try to limit our experiences to not experience things that will blow our circuits or things that are too much for us. And what we need to do is come up with a way to gradually grow into the capacity that our own bodies actually have and discover what that capacity is and cultivate that capacity. For example, by learning to self regulate through breathing and things like that, or engaging practices like laying on a Shakti mat or doing vagal nerve exercises or things that will shift us into a parasympathetic state. So we learn how to get ourselves out of these more extreme stress states and get ourselves to relax as a way that we address our stress and our life requirements. Okay. So that's part of that process of maturing, and I'll get into another technique of maturing in just a minute. A common practice in our culture is that when you are doing healing work or you're doing therapy, that automatically means that you are processing stuff. We think that there's like an excavation, that we confront something and then we process the impact that that thing had on us. It's definitely legitimate and it's definitely one aspect of it. But most often with self-support fatigue, the issue isn't that we need to process things. The issue is that we need tools, including language and techniques and actual tools like medication or a Shakti mat or food delivery or something like that. We need to address the tools. We need to address whether we actually got the mirroring, if we even know how to do some of these things, instead of assuming we know how to do them just because we've been surviving. We need to really look at our tools. We need to look at, have we had the practice we need with other people to develop skillfulness with the tools we have? And sometimes the biggest thing people with self-support fatigue need is they need better tools, and they need a safe place to become skillful with those tools so they can behave differently out in the world and not be the only ones in their lives holding themselves up. So people with self-support fatigue often have a hard time trusting others. They have a hard time delegating. They have a hard time not being hyper independent. They have a hard time expressing their needs. And it's something that as we address this, we begin to try and really focus on maturing by getting ourselves what we need before we put ourselves in a position of having to support ourselves even more. There can be some unconscious resentment or some very conscious resentment about the idea, I've been holding myself up my entire life and now I have to do more for myself. That's very hard. It's very hard territory to confront. And that's what I mean by maturing, is we need to figure out a way to confront that, because the truth is that we're not children anymore. We don't have people to take care of us in the way that we needed as children. We need to figure out the kinds of support and ways we need to be cared for as adults, and we need to be able to commit to learning how to be more effective in our own lives. And that can feel very overwhelming when you're already so exhausted and depleted from supporting yourself. So here's a little exercise that you can try that I have found to be very, very effective for a lot of people that I've worked with. Essentially, what you do is you first need to recognize when the part of you that has the self-support fatigue is present. Where do you feel that in your body? And what are the signals that that part of your body is generating? So for example, do you feel it in your stomach? Do you feel it in your shoulders? Do you feel it in the back of your neck? Do you feel it in your left foot? Right? And then what are you feeling? Does it feel hot or cold? Is there a color that it might have? Does it feel airy or really sticky? Does it feel dense? Does it feel light? Just any language that you can have for the way that it feels and where you might be feeling that. So being able to just identify when it's present so that it can alert you to then take step number 2. Step number 2 is essentially where you make a distinction between the part of you that is in self-support fatigue as the young part of you, the burnt out, overburdened, stressed out little kid who didn't get the help or support that they needed or was holding up way too much by themselves. So recognizing that part of you and then cultivating another part that is like the auntie or uncle to that little child. And I say auntie or uncle, not parent. So we can cultivate this idea that maybe there was a person available to us that if they were around, who would protect and notice and mirror and support and care for us and teach us in really healthy ways. So we're going to create that identity in ourselves as adults. So you yourself as an adult are going to become the auntie or uncle to the self-support fatigued little kid that you used to be. And you're going to start noticing that kid and engaging in dialogue with that kid, noticing when that part of you is present, when that part of you is being petulant or resistant or throwing a tantrum or preventing you from being able to enact self-care that you need to enact as a grown-up. And beginning to have a dialogue with that part of you from the perspective of being supportive and compassionate and nurturing to this young part of yourself. And then what you do as the adult is you listen to this part of you, and then you can share that with whomever is your support person, your healer, your therapist, whatever it might be, and ask for a tool or advice. You can research a tool or advice if you don't already know, to just wonder what would be something I could do to support this part of me, is to support this little kid in the healthiest way possible. Sometimes that means running interference. Sometimes it means stepping in as the adult. You step in as the adult and you don't let other people have access to that part of you. Because oftentimes when we have what we might call a childhood wound like this, that wounded kid is out on the front lines getting blasted by everybody. And if we didn't get, especially if we didn't get proper mirroring, that little kid is out there looking to any person, any random person to mirror them. So if you're in a grocery store and you go up to the produce clerk and you say, "Excuse me, do you have any kiwis?" And they turn around and give you a really dirty look and they go, "They're over there." If you have a insufficient amount of mirroring and you're trying to complete that process, you may actually start to go, "What did I do wrong? I should have approached them differently." You'll take it as a sign that you are somehow not right, and you will not be as easily able to separate that out and go, "They're probably having a bad day," or whatever, but not internalizing it. So if you find yourself internalizing other people's behaviors a lot to mean something about you that you then feel responsible to do something about, that might be an indication that there is a lack of mirroring. That often means that there's probably also some self-support fatigue. So we practice noticing where in our body is the child holding the self-support fatigue, the maxed out little kid. Where is that showing up in our body and how is it showing up so we can recognize it? And then take responsibility for it by separating ourselves out from it and cultivating this auntie or uncle persona that can then pay attention to this child. And by separating ourselves out from it, it allows us to be in a less fatigued, more helpful, more protective stance with that child. And it puts us in a position to be able to advocate for that little kid in the world, for that little kid in therapeutic or healing settings, for that little kid just in your day-to-day inner critic, pushing away the inner critic and really having a sense of responsibility to want to help that kid by getting better tools, getting more skillfulness, learning how to ask for needs, asking other people to make you some food or help you fold laundry or do whatever it is. It just changes up that dynamic a little bit, and sometimes a lot. And then if you feel like you do have self-support fatigue, definitely talk to whomever you're working with about it, because they will notice that you seem non-compliant or you seem inconsistent or you seem resistant, but they may not understand where it's coming from. So if you are maxed out from a lifetime of having to support yourself, your healing process needs to consider that. And your healing process needs to integrate that. And at least in the beginning, to find tools and modalities and pathways that something else does it for you until you begin to mature and grow your capacity and learn how to advocate for yourself in different ways so that you don't have resentment from the fact that your only way out of your healing is that you have to do more self-support. As I said earlier, that's a very tricky point of resistance in a lot of us, and it's a very tricky point of resentment that a lot of us can carry. And just acknowledging that and understanding that that's what's going on, it's not a personal failing on you. It's that part of you that's maxed out is trying to communicate as best they can. They don't want to keep having to do this, that they want healing so they can get out of the trap of self-support. That is a child's fantasy. And as adults, we don't ever actually get out of that. But what we do is we get more skillful with the fact that we're responsible for ourselves. It's different as an adult than being responsible for yourself as a child. It's not as taxing. We have ways of doing it where we can select the people around us, we can delegate, we can make requests, we can surround ourselves with more reciprocity, we can talk more honestly in the vulnerability. People will volunteer to help us. It's a much different experience than we have as a child. Maybe for years we hear, like, if you just make the changes, you would be okay, but we don't know we're dealing with self-support fatigue. We can feel very trapped, and it can feel like the same thing. Like the support I have to do as an adult now is just as bad as the supports I had to do as a kid, and it's not. It's really not. It's a very different situation, but if you don't navigate that territory skillfully and consciously and really address where those points of resistance are, what the unmet needs are, what the tools are that you may not have, just even that discovery process can be so relieving. Like, yeah, nobody taught me this. I've been expecting myself to just know this whole time and then beating myself up that I'm struggling, right? There's a lot of points of relief and liberation along the way of discovering, like, what did I not get? How can I address that and incorporate that before I'm expected to go get my life together? Right? These are the foundational things we need to address and make sure those are in place, or else you will stall out, you will resist, you will not comply, you will resent, you will drag your feet because you really want relief, but you really don't want to have to keep doing it by yourself because you've been doing that your whole life. So name that. Talk about that with people around you. Even if you're not in therapy, just talk about it, explore it with yourself and challenge, like, where did I get the tools? Where did I get the mirroring? How do I know what feelings I have? How do I know that I'm identifying my feelings correctly? Can I expand my feeling language? What are basic human needs? Just start exploring all that stuff and really making sure that those foundational pieces are even tended to, because if they're not, your healing journey is going to get really dragged out and it's probably going to be really frustrating. So self-support fatigue, it's just a term I came up with to describe a very real phenomenon that happens that often doesn't get talked about in healing settings. So I hope this has been helpful for you. Thanks. Bye-bye.